Many of us had grew up interacting with those around us, treating them equal, whether or not their skin was dark or white. Unlike the past, society now has mostly stopped their old segregated ways in order to treat blacks as normal American citizens. We have always heard of their contributions to the civil and the world wars, but what about the scientific or math-related contributions? So I'm very interested, from the beginning of how African Americans affected them, how their contributions affected society today in the civil rights movement, and how they're doing now, 50 years after Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement. To begin with, how do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all the assumptions associated with their skin and where they were born? Have we as a society really evolved beyond our judgmental past? Or have our views simply changed so that we can more easily hide our inner thoughts in the body? Every day, many people always say that African Americans have long been accepted into history as a great contributor to the society we have today. But few actually choose to learn the contributions they have made to America, and less people know of the African Americans and their contributions in the field of STEM: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. For example, not many know of Dr. Charles Dew and how he discovered how to preserve blood, or how in 1987 Dr. Ben Carson was the first to separate a pair of Siamese twins successfully. And most importantly, Mark Dean led the research for creating the first gigahertz computer processor chip, a chip that has put us more than 2 decades ahead in computer technology. Without these contributions, where would we be today? Certainly without easily accessible blood transfusions in our own personal computers, society wouldn't be what we know as it now. Furthermore, how many babies have lived due to the procedures formed by Dr. Ben Carson's operation? Remember, this was during the era of strong oppositions against blacks. For instance, in 1951, despite high oppositions by many of his white peers, such as death threats, attempted attacks, and just plain out racism, Walter Cooper became the first black male to obtain a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Rochester. He had 3 patents as well and many research publications to his credit. But most of all, the reason he majored in science was that, as he states, I became a scientist because I did not see any black scientists. I looked around and all I saw was black doctors, black lawyers, but no black scientists. I chose that as a challenge. He faced many hardships endeavoring this challenge, to which he was refused by many companies and colleges on his path of becoming a black scientist. And yet, he continued to push to complete the challenge he undertook, as well pushing for civil rights of African Americans. Now then, many of you have probably heard of the current amazing high scores of Asians and their high achievement in academics. However, while Asians may have high scores, the scores of blacks have not been what they should be. They are among the lowest for almost every standardized test recorded throughout the United States of America. Here's a picture. As one can see, there's a varying trends among different races. So what causes this difference? A high probability is because of stereotype threat. Stereotype can be known as a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when blacks behave the way that society thinks they should behave as. In society today, Asians are stereotyped to be smart, successful, and hardworking. But blacks, on the other hand, are stereotyped to be just druggies, thieves, criminals, and unsuccessful. Studies by Cloud Steele, Stephen Spencer, and Joshua Arison have shown that such stereotype has resulted in blacks receiving lower scores on standardized tests because they are threatened to believe they are not suited for education. If people stop contributing to such stereotypes, blacks may feel better about themselves and do better on standardized tests. Blacks can contribute many more discoveries toward the field of STEM if they feel less threatened and do better on tests. These tests can lead them to believe that they can do well in STEM and may put more effort into education. An educated society is an advanced society. More discoveries will be made as more blacks get educated and know what they're doing. Many of you have probably heard of the many organizations offering scholarships to African Americans in order to improve their scores. Then you have heard of blacks' achievement in academics. But what was the cause for this sudden change? From a race that once had inferior education and no rights to now where they have equal educational opportunities, blacks are still slacking behind in scores. An explanation for this sudden change is during the Harlem Renaissance, white attitudes towards blacks began to change drastically as blacks began to take advantage of the boom in wealth and culture in America, showing up almost everywhere in the artistic world. As African Americans slowly made grand steps in several fields, bringing their culture along with them, they began to earn the respect of other races. This would later spark the flames for civil rights, but the Great Depression brought a fast end to many movements due to thousands of blacks being laid off their jobs. Although blacks fought fiercely for civil rights till then, this change in attitude occurred during a matter of a few dozen years as they became a true valued part of society. With now few limits, they tried to create their own black communities, well knitted together. The attempt at first seemed to have brought blacks together, but as poverty continued and crime raged throughout black neighborhoods, views on blacks began to shift. Blacks began to become associated with crime and low achievements. However, little had been done by the black communities to solve this ever-growing problem. This is because as crime rates rise and scores plummet, blacks are slowly gaining a negative recognition as a large playing role in the crime rates and scores. Despite these scores, African Americans were still able to achieve great things during the Depression in STEM, which did receive recognition by the government and the people. Archie Alexander, for example, was an African American who was able to find work engineering bridges, power plants, and major structures across the nation during the Great Depression. This man was able to overcome the prejudice in the white company for he worked in, as he was able to rise up to be in charge of the company's bridge building department. But eventually, he even formed his own company, and for the next 4 years, Alexander continued to run the company on his own, gaining a reputation as a talented black construction engineer who built many bridges and tunnels throughout Iowa. His firm was as well so successful that it was named by the press the nation's most successful interracial firm. His work was something extraordinary during this time, for he had transcended above the stereotypical ideas of whites, as he had earned the respect of many white people to be promoted to manager of bridge building in a white firm, and building a firm of his very own to have several white Ionian newspapers call a top and successful interracial firm. As one can see, his work serves as an example of how African Americans in STEM sped up the civil rights movement, as there were many others who have contributed just as much as Alexander has in earning the respect of the white race. To conclude, African Americans, despite white resistance, have achieved great things in today's American society that have and perhaps always have affected the way we live. Going back to our graph above, African Americans hold much lower scores than any other race, even though they have been given equal educational rights in America. Now then, I ask of you, the students and citizens of America, what can you do to help African Americans? If the cause was a shift in attitudes, then what can you do to change your fellow citizens and encourage them to rise up once more? Thank you for listening.